We're now starting on the actual anatomical part of the series, and we're going to be doing this in a few different ways. We're not just going to jump straight into the highly specific anatomy. We are instead going to talk about the main volumes and how you can simplify it down into easy to understand bits, really. It gets very complicated when you're dealing with highly specific muscles and bones. And what you need most of the time is more just these simple volumes. So we are going to go through the simplified version of the torso, and then of course we'll get into the bones and the important muscles as well in later chapters. We have already covered some of this in other chapters, but I am just going to cover this again here now just to be sure that we're not missing anything. We want to make sure that all information is in one spot as well. So if you want to go back to these videos in the future, you can always just go back to one main area. So the torso is comprised of essentially a few different shapes. We have the rib cage here, which is the egg shape, like we mentioned, and then it goes down here like so. Then we have the hips. Then remember we have the Mickey Mouse ears, where we have the crest here, and then we have the spine going through it like so, which attaches to the hips down here, and then we have the clavicles right here, and then we have still the spine going through it like so. And then on the back side, we have the shoulder blades or the scapulas right here. Now, if you look at this with muscles, this looks quite different. And one thing I find to be really useful when we're dealing with the torso is to think about this just simplified into more simple volumes, because this stuff here is really hard. You can basically simplify this whole thing into like a few different cubes. So we can have one cube that goes more this way here. So we can have one that goes more like so. This is for the directionality of it. So this would be that this is facing this way. The normal of this would be facing that way. And then we have the hips, and they would be facing this way. This way you get some natural balance in the whole thing, because what's very common is that people just do this for the ribs and then they do this for the hips, and then the whole thing is just flat. And that's just really, really boring. It doesn't look interesting at all. But if you have these cubes, you can really play with them. And what you're seeing is that you're going to be getting a lot of gesture throughout the whole thing. So you're going to be getting like a gesture flowing through this whole shape. This is really, really important to make this feel nice and natural. And just by doing these two cubes, you really get a lot of the gesture just automatically. You almost get the three curves we talked about. Remember, we have three curves. We have one curve like so. Basically, we have the parentheses with an extra parenthesis, or, starts with a C. So this is the cervical part. So it starts with this. We do this, and now we kind of just get this part here already, because we basically just fill in this, and then you get this part here as well, like so. So you almost get this like gesture just going through the whole thing, like so. So I really find it to be useful to simplify it into these shapes. Another thing I find to be really useful is this goes a little bit against what we just talked about. Remember, the cube was like this way. The more correct way, it would be to make this, instead of like this, would be to make it go more like this. The last cube was more to explain the concept of the normal direction, but the important part here is now going to be this line here. So if we erase this, what we're seeing now, if we go to the skeleton view, so we have a few lines here. Notice this line goes like so, this line goes like so, this line goes like so, and this line goes like so. So it's almost like we have like 4 lines that basically have the same angle. Doop, 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 doop. And this is pretty important, because if you get these lines right, you just have a lot more rhythm in the body. So these lines here, just going zoop, 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 and zoop, really useful. And then you can also see here as well that the sternum here is actually quite straight. So here we basically have a straight line like so. And this is almost like the same line that goes like so as well. So I think it's really important to look at these major shapes like so. This stuff is just really important. In terms of the hips as well, notice how it actually has this quite steep angle and goes back like so as well. So let's look into some of the rhythms of the torso as well. I found it to be really useful to not just think about in terms of like the curve like this and so, or like the boxes and such. This is of course useful, but I find it to be really useful to think more about the rhythms of it. So there's a bit of a gesture just going into the whole thing. So this gesture here is basically, you have the curve like so, and then this curve goes like so, but it's more like an underlying thing. This basically goes from this point, like it has this curve like so, and then it continues down like so as well. So I think this is really important. You can also do the opposite on the other side, where you see you have this shape like so, and this basically goes in like so and goes into the butt like so. And this looks a little bit like yin and yang, where it just kind of balances each other. And speaking of these rhythms, it's really useful to think about the lumbar curve right here. You have there's a lumbar spine just right here, the last curve, how this can like really push the whole thing forward. So usually you have a bit of like a shape that goes like so, goes up like so, and this can go quite a lot outwards like so. What you see a lot as well is around here, this is where you have a bit of like a plane change. So it goes like so. This is a very important plane change. You actually see this on a model a little bit. It goes like so, and then it go up, and then you have the pecs going out like so. So this plane change here, pretty useful, and then it really just goes out like so, following the rib cage like so, and then it continues and it does this like counter curve here that again also goes into the butt like so. It's also important to look at how the neck actually connects, because it's really, really common to just make this perfectly straight. Well, this does actually have more of a curve like so. So this connects into more of a curve like we're seeing with this. And that's really it for the overview of the torso. Next up, let's have a look at the skeleton.